All right, for our next project, we're going to be focusing on an element of art and a principle of design. The element of art we're going to be focusing is on value, which refers to how light or dark something is, which you all are very familiar with. The principle of design we're going to be focusing on is unity, where all the elements of the artwork flow and work with one another. So I want you to think about those two things as we complete this part of this project. Photorealism is a genre of art that we are going to be focusing on for this project as well. It encompasses painting, drawing, and other graphic media in which an artist studies a photograph and then attempts to reproduce the image as realistically as possible in another medium. So essentially what artists used to do is they used to take a photo or find a photo that they thought was very interesting to them, and then they would either paint it or draw it or even sculpt it or really do anything as best they can to make it look as realistically as possible. It began in the 1960s, and it really became super popular throughout a lot of different areas, and a lot of different artists used photorealism as a way to express themselves. One of the most famous photorealist painters was Chuck Close. He was born in 1940 in Washington State. When he was younger, he struggled in school, and he really became obsessed with drawing people. So he struggled with reading and writing and math skills, but he really felt like he was successful in studying people's faces, so that's what he did. As he became older, he became really interested in painting large-scale photos of people that were very hyper-realistic. So meaning that when you looked at them, they almost looked like a photograph rather than a painting. He's still really famous today. He's still alive, and he continues to create really, really large-scale works of art that are super, super realistic. So for this project, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking Chuck Close as a source of inspiration, and we are going to be creating a photorealist drawing that has that is anything that you want, essentially. So let's go over some of the steps on how we can do this. The first step is you're going to choose your image. You can look up an image of an animal or anything of your choice. It doesn't have to be an animal. I chose my dog. It can be on the computer where you Google it, or it could be a picture that you took. So it really depends on what you're looking for. Print out the image in black and white or in color. Make sure that the image, when it is printed, it fills up the entire computer paper. After you do that, we're going to grid your photo and your final draft paper. It is important to put a grid on your photo and your final draft paper because it actually helps you with navigating exactly what you should be drawing within each square, which makes your artwork more realistic. So instead of focusing on the entire piece when we're drawing, we're going to be focusing on each grid as we draw each outline of the thing that we're drawing. In the next video, it actually shows you how to grid your paper. So let's take a look. All right, so for this part of the project, you're going to need a few things. I'm going to be showing you how to grid your picture and then how to create the grid on your paper as well. All right, so you'll need a few things. As I said, you'll need your picture that you have chosen. You can have, the picture can be taken. Okay, you can have taken the picture, or you can find a picture online. It could be of any animal you want. What you are going to do is you're going to make sure that you printed out the entire size of the regular printer paper, so make sure it takes up the entire thing. Another thing you're going to need is a ruler. You'll also need a pencil, and you'll need your final draft paper. Okay, so I have all four of those things here. I'm going to push aside my final draft paper because I don't really need that right now. I am just going to show you how to complete a grid on your top of your drawing. So what I'm going to be using for this, just so that you guys can see it better on the screen, I'm going to be using a Sharpie. You can if you want, but I'd suggest just use a pencil when you're creating your grid. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to the top of your paper, okay, and you're going to line up your ruler with the top of your paper, okay? So as you can see here, I have the ruler lined up to where my paper ends, or where it starts, and then it just goes straight across. So what we are doing, this paper is 8.5 by 11, okay? So what we're going to do, just to make it easier on us, we are just going to do a mark on top of every single inch. All right, so I'm starting from here, holding down on my ruler, and I'm just going to make a mark right above every single inch mark on the ruler. So I'm just making little marks. And then at the end, obviously, there's going to be a smaller grid here, which is fine because we can't make a mark because the paper is only 8.5. So then I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. So what I'm doing, going to the bottom, I'm lining up my ruler as best I can, making sure that the first line starts at the edge of the paper. And I'm just going to, once again, create these little tick marks, I like to call them, right above each number so that we have 1 inch by 1 inch squares. Okay? All right. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my ruler with the top mark that I made and the bottom mark that I made, okay, down here. And I'm going to create a straight line and almost like connect the dots. So I'm just lining this up very carefully. Okay, holding down on the ruler and then just creating my first grid line. Okay, I'm doing the same thing throughout the entire artwork, or picture I should say. Holding down my ruler and then just making the grid line. It's important that your grids are completely straight. Your lines are completely straight. So really take the time to measure each part accurately so that you can create an accurate grid and you'll have the same grid on your final draft piece of paper. So I'm just going to continue to do this throughout the entire picture. Okay, I'm just making these hard vertical lines, and then eventually I'm going to also make horizontal lines, which I'll show you next. Okay. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip my paper to the side, okay? And essentially what I just did on the top and the bottom, I'm going to do the same thing up here. So once again, I'm going to make sure that I line my ruler up appropriately, make those tick marks right above each number on the ruler, so every inch. I'm just making a little mark, okay? And go by 10, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. So once again, line it up and make your tick marks. And these marks are just like the guidelines essentially so that you can create really straight lines. Okay. And then last step is I am going to line them up, hold down my ruler, and create these lines that go now horizontally along my photo of my dog. Okay. So I'm almost done here. The reason why we do this is because it makes it easier on us when we are drawing. We're going to look at every single grid or every single square within the grid, and we're going to draw exactly what we see in the grid. So you just want to make sure that you are lining these up as best you can. And I have a few more left. One more after this. And remember, I'm really applying pressure down on my ruler so that my ruler doesn't move when I press against it with my marker or my pencil. And done. All right, so now as you can see, I have a bunch of grids here, okay, a bunch of squares. And now this is going to be great for when I start to draw on my final draft piece of paper. Now, when it comes to our final draft piece of paper, we are doing the exact same thing, okay? You are making the exact same grid that you made on here onto a blank piece of paper before you start drawing. So please do not start drawing what you see within each grid. You have to make the grid first on this paper. Now with this paper, you must use a pencil. The reason why is because we're going to be erasing those grid marks. So remember, once again, I'm not going to do the whole thing, but I'll just show you. Line up the ruler, take a pencil, and lightly now make your tick marks above each number on your ruler so that there's 1 inch, okay? And you're going to do the same thing on the bottom. Okay. And I'm just quickly doing this because I don't want to waste too much time. Okay. And once again, lining up my tick marks and making a very light line here. Okay, so light that you can't even see it. The reason why we're doing light is because we are going to be erasing these, as I said. So you just want to make sure that you really keep it nice and light so that you know where each grid is, where each square is, I should say. And then 2, you can erase. So I'm just doing this same exact thing, continuing down my paper, or across my paper, I should say. And once I'm finished with this, I'm going to also do the horizontal grid lines as well. And this shouldn't take you too long. As you can see, I mean, you know, I think it's going to take me probably maybe 5 or 10 minutes just to grid my paper. It's not very, very difficult. Once again, flip your paper over, the final draft paper. Take your pencil and your ruler, make those lines above each number. So you're making 1 by 1 squares, 1 inch by 1 inch. Doing the same thing on the bottom here. Okay, 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch. And try to be as accurate as possible because you definitely don't want curvy lines here. Or slanted lines, I should say. Okay, once again, nice and very, very lightly making my grid lines. I'm not putting down a lot of pressure as I am creating these grid lines. And as I stated before, the reason why we do this when we're drawing things in, you know, photorealism is because it will make sure that we have a very accurate representation of our photo of our choice. And it makes it easier because instead of looking at the whole entire drawing and getting overwhelmed by it, we are just looking at the drawing in sections, very, very small sections, which is super beneficial, I think, when trying to draw as realistic as possible. Okay, so after you create your grid, it is now time for step 3, transferring the outlines. There are many shapes inside each square. Some of them are well defined and some are blurry. You'll need to copy them all. Okay, try not to think about what you are drawing at in a whole as a whole. Just copy the shapes accurately that you see. Think that you are trying to copy an abstract design within each square. For me, it always helps to cover the area around the square that you are copying at that time. Use a sticky note or even a few pieces of paper, just like I did in the photo, to kind of block out any other areas and to help you concentrate on just one square without being distracted by the others. It is super important as you copy the shapes that you do not shade anything or color anything. We are just focusing on the outlines. Some things to remember. Start with the big shapes first. Notice the outlines of the main shapes and then copy them into the corresponding square that you're working on. Now draw the secondary shapes. Even if they are not well defined, try your best and draw their outlines. Work with one square at a time and copy everything you see. When finished, erase the grid, especially the areas of light value. Let's take a look at how Ms. Parlow does this. All right, so for our photorealism project, you should have gridded your photo, and you also should have put the same exact grid onto a blank piece of paper. Remember, the reason why we're doing the grid is because it's going to help us, because instead of looking at the picture as a whole, when you do photorealism, you actually just want to look at the sections of it and then draw exactly what you see in each section. Okay, so what I like to do, just a few tips, is as you can see, I've done 1, 2, 3. I've done 3 squares up here. I like to take Post-it notes and just kind of block out where I'm focusing my attention to when it comes to drawing. Okay, and you can make like a little piece of paper if you wanted to do this. I just think it's like a great way to kind of focus on just that square rather than looking at the whole thing. So when I'm looking at the square here, I can see that there are kind of like the lines right here from the fence that's behind, or the little like gate that's behind my dog. I also see that her fur kind of comes out around here. So that's all I'm going to be drawing in this square. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm taking my pencil and I'm just drawing the basic shapes. I'm not adding any value at this point. I'm just kind of focusing on what's the shape of the square. You know, I'm also noticing, okay, if this is where this part of the gate is, take a look at how much negative space is left there. So I'm going to make sure I like match that up. And I might even curve this just a little bit because it is kind of on like a slant. Okay. So as you can see, the first part of my almost my first row is completely done. Now what I'm going to do, same thing on my last square. I just really think it's important to always block out what you want to not look at. And the only thing here is I just have like a piece of the gate behind her. So I'm just going to be making that. I'm not focusing on shading or coloring. I'm focusing on each outline of the object that's in that square. So once again, I'm going to come down here, block out what I need to block out. And that's why it's so important to grid your paper so that you can literally just focus on certain aspects of it. Okay, so once again over here, I see that there is another part of this, almost like the gate. I'm just trying to draw that. Okay. There's also this white thing over here, which I'm not exactly sure. And then it looks like the kind of fence closes off. And then I'm going to make kind of the fur right here. I'm not, as I said, really no values or anything, but I do like to note where certain things fall. All right, and I'm just going to do one more just so that you can see how this puzzle is kind of slowly forming together. Just going to block out everything around and just focus on one square. Okay, and let's move this to make sure it's perfect. And now I'm going to look and I say, okay, this is where her like bottom of her, almost like her fur comes out. I'm going to have to draw a lot of details on the fur in order to make this really look more like my dog, but that's okay. Okay. This is going to be definitely really black here, it looks like. As I said, I'm not really shading, but I do like to make note of where things fall. Okay, and then it looks like her nose is actually starting here, but I'm just focusing on what I see. So I'm just going to start to focus on that. All right. All right, and so as you can see, if I lift this up, my dog is slowly starting to come to life. It may not be perfect yet, but it's definitely the way to go when we are trying to create photorealism drawings. All right, so for step 4, you're going to begin shading and adding color. Take a careful look at your photograph and find the most important and detailed areas. These are the areas you want to focus on. Start shading with the darkest values first. Carefully shade all values and value transitions. Use small strokes. The drawing should have as many value variations as the photograph does. Have the strokes go in the direction or the texture, in the direction of the texture, okay? If you would prefer to add color, you can do that. You can use colored pencils or even crayons, but you need to make sure that you are really taking your time when you are adding color, because in order to make it as realistically as possible, we need to definitely make sure that we're layering things. Let's take a look at this video to help us with the shading or the coloring aspect. Okay, so our next part of the project after we've done the outline is to do two things. The first thing is you definitely want to start erasing some of your grid lines, right? We don't need these grid lines anymore, so you should start to erase them with an eraser, okay? So that it looks more like a cohesive piece rather than a puzzle, Okay, so you'll start to erase those grid lines everywhere. Once you've erased those grid lines, you can always go back in and make sure that you fill in any sort of lines that you may have erased accidentally, but your artwork should be pretty good. So you have the choice after you erase to either do your artwork in black and white or in color. Okay, if you choose to do it in black and white, you are going to do shading with a charcoal pencil or some sort of charcoal or even a pencil. All right, just to remind yourselves really quickly, if you are shading, you want to take a look at the dark areas of your picture and also the light areas, okay? So remember, when we are shading, we're just focusing on creating value with some of the darks, okay? And also creating the light areas. Remember, when we are using charcoal or even pencil, the more pressure that you put down, that means that you're going to have darker areas. The less pressure you put down, you're going to have lighter areas. It's also important to just note and remember that you can always use a blending stick for these lighter areas to kind of blend them a little bit more. You don't want to blend it too much though, because if you start to blend, you're not going to see your darks and your lights. So just be aware of that as well. When I'm blending, I usually start with my darker areas and try to go around and find my lighter areas after. Okay. And remember, you can always hatch or cross hatch. It's really up to you. You can also take a kneaded eraser to kind of erase some marks as well. All right, so that's how we would be shading, but it's only if you want to, so you can shade with that. If you don't want to shade and you'd rather color, what you are going to use, you can have either two things to use. I would either use colored pencils or I would use acrylic paint. It's really up to you. I'm going to try to push you guys to more so go towards the colored pencil route, just because obviously colored pencils is more so in the drawing scheme of things. But if you really want to get a little bit technical, you can always use acrylic paint. All right, so when we're using colored pencils, a lot of colored pencil designs and really good drawings are based around layers, okay? So you need to make sure that you have, one, a sharpener near you so you can sharpen anything, any of your colored pencils. And two, you want to make sure that you have a large amount of colors of colored pencils just so that you are able to start to add these layers in. Okay, so if I'm taking a look at this area, I can see that is pretty bright green, and I definitely want to start adding some colors. What I am first going to do, though, I am going to actually start to really erase some of these lines, because with colored pencils, it's kind of hard to cover some of those pencil lines, so definitely make sure you erase as much as you can without actually erasing your outlines. You know, I do like to kind of erase some of the lines just so that I can really make sure that I'm filling in exactly what I need to fill in. All right. So then, as I said, colored pencils, using colored pencils is all about layering. So starting with really, really light layers, okay, of color, and then having them blend in over darker colors is going to really be a nice effect. Okay, so color pencils do take a while, because it's really about controlling the amount of pressure that you put down and how much layering you want to do. Obviously, I think that the more layers you put down, the better color situation you kind of have going on. So you definitely want to make sure that you're really working in smaller areas and you're layering as much as you can. In these blurry areas in the background of your photos, it is a little harder and trickier to kind of get the perfect picture, but that's okay because it is blurry and we are just blending. That is totally fine. So I'm just trying to kind of blend this in a little bit. might make some harder strokes in there, right? Because I'm really trying my best to match here what's over here. Just to let you know, you can always blend other colors with each other when you are doing your colored pencils. It's really nice to blend in, you know, blacks and browns when things get a little bit darker, because you definitely want to show just that nice value that you'll have in your piece. Okay. It's really all about, though, the pressure that you put down and how much time you're willing to take when it comes to, you know, creating your piece. Another thing to remember, too, you can do something called burnishing, which is just blending colors together with a white color pencil. So take advantage of that, too. That's like a great blending mechanism to do when you are coloring with colored pencils.